Good evening. The Prime Minister today unveiled a clutch of labour initiatives under the aegis of Shrameva Jayate. But is labour reform, or the lack of it, that really ails Indian manufacturing and its ability to generate mass employment? Welcome to the news tonight. I'm Zaka Jacob. These are the headlines that we're tracking on the show tonight. Prime Minister Narendra Modi unveils labour reforms to make doing business easy. Universal account number for PF and single window clearance are some of the highlights. Home Minister Rajnath Singh says no one can warn or threaten India a day after China says India's road building project in Arunachal Pradesh will complicate the border dispute. The Modi government shuffles bureaucrats. Rajasthan cadre IAS officer Rajiv Merishi replaces Arvind Mayaram as the new finance secretary. ISRO places third navigation satellite IRNSS-1C in space. Disaster management, vehicle tracking and fleet management will get a huge boost as a result. And the Supreme Court hears Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi's petition on missing children. It pulls up state governments for negligence and inaction. And our top story on the news tonight, Shrameva Jayate. That's the name given to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Big Bang labour reforms. No government, at least not in recent years, has broached the issue of labour reforms for fear of angering unions and raising a political storm. This government has managed to tread where others have feared to go, but the bigger question is, will it solve the problem of generating mass employment?
जितनी ताकत सत्यमेव जयते की है, उतनी ही ताकत राष्ट्र के विकास के लिए श्रम एव जयते की है.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi today moved labour reforms up in his list of priorities. If implemented, these reforms will end up cranking up the manufacturing jobs machine like never before. At the launch of the Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay Shramev Jayate Karyakram, Prime Minister Modi envisaged a total revamp that will make it easier to do business in the country.
मेक इन इंडिया को सफल करना है तो ईज ऑफ बिजनेस ये सबसे पहली रिक्वायरमेंट है. ईज ऑफ बिजनेस प्रमुखतया शासन की जिम्मेवारी होती है. उसकी कानूनी व्यवस्थाएं, उसका इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, उसकी स्पीड, ये सारी बातें उसके साथ जुड़ी हुई हैं. और इसलिए ईज ऑफ बिजनेस मेक इन इंडिया की प्रायोरिटी है.
The pro-labour reforms detailed by the Prime Minister include demand-based vocational training, an apprentice scheme and revamp of the health insurance scheme to benefit workers in the unorganised sector. The country's micro, small and medium enterprises sector comprises almost 36 million units, employing 81 million people. While many of these are service sector enterprises, a good chunk are also small manufacturing enterprises, which remain small in order to receive excise concessions and avoid labour laws. Under the proposed system, a unique labour identification number will be allotted to industrial units to facilitate online registration. Compliance will also be ensured online, with the number of returns to be filed being reduced from the present 16 to just 1. Inspectors visiting factories to ensure compliance of the law will no longer be free to pick and choose whom they choose to visit, a key cause of selective harassment leading to bribery and corruption, also known as Inspector Raj. Instead, inspectors will now be allotted to industries through a computerized system and they have to file their reports within 3 days. But perhaps the biggest changes relate to a draft new law intended to free small factories forever from the tentacles of Inspector Raj and compliance hassles, the Small Factories Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Services Bill 2014.
ई-गवर्नेंस, ईजी गवर्नेंस है, इफेक्टिव गवर्नेंस है, इकोनॉमिकल गवर्नेंस भी है. एट द सेम टाइम ई-गवर्नेंस ट्रांसपेरेंसी के लिए भी कुल मिलाकर के एक विश्वास पैदा करता है.
Along with this new draft law, the Labour Ministry is also planning to repeal 3 other labour laws. This is the first time in recent years that the issue of labour reforms has been broached. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
So it's a big ticket push for labour reforms. Is labour reforms really what is holding back manufacturing and its ability to generate mass employment in this country, or does that issue just get a lot of decibels? Santosh Mehrotra is the Director General of the Institute of Applied Manpower Research. He's now joining us on the news tonight. Thanks very much for speaking with us and joining us on the program tonight. Is there any empirical evidence, Doctor, to suggest that it's the lack of labour reform that is holding back manufacturing and manufacturing's ability to generate mass employment in our country?
Well, labour reform is required. There's no question about that. But if we are to go by surveys that have been done by the World Bank over the last few years, then employers and industry say that labour and labour issues and labour reform is actually fourth or fifth in the list of priorities that they would put before the government, which doesn't mean that labour reform is not required. There's no question that it is required. So what the government has done today is certainly a step in the right direction. But the fact remains there are many other things on the minds of industry, small industry in particular. I'm glad that the Prime Minister is focusing his attention on Inspector Raj, particularly for small factories and so on. It's absolutely critical that small factories, small enterprises have to be enabled to grow larger. It's only when they, become more productive and are able to grow larger that they can generate more jobs. That's the need of the hour, more jobs to be generated, which tend to be generated by the small enterprises. So anything that's done to reduce the burden on them in the sense of the Inspector Raj and the reduction in the number of returns that they have to file is obviously good news, but it is not the only thing. Skills are required, power is required, credit is required.
So why then does this particular issue, the lack of labour reforms, get so much attention in the media, in the academic world, and most importantly within government?
Well, it's unfortunate that it gets this kind of attention because let's remember that labour laws actually tend to apply barely to 7% of the total workforce, which is the formal sector workforce in the country. 93% of our workforce is in the informal sector. 78% of the total workforce is in enterprises employing less than 10 workers. And 93% of all the workers are informal workers, to which laws barely apply. So, it tends to get all the attention because the media is obviously focused on urban, on industry, and on organized and formal sector enterprises. That's what the pink press is focused on. It's not focused, unfortunately, on the 80% or the 90%.
So will today's initiatives, any of it, actually address this over 90% who are involved in the informal sector? Will it be of any benefit?
No, it does. They do. Some of the things that have been mentioned are very much affecting the majority of the workforce, especially the poorest workforce. Please remember the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which has been around now since 2008, is focused on the below poverty line workers. And the numbers for that have grown very rapidly. They now cover about 25%, it does cover about 25% of the country's population. But the fact remains that, the evidence suggests that RSBY, which is intended to cover health insurance for a family of 5 up to a maximum of 30,000 rupees in a year for some specified diseases, actually has not succeeded in reducing out-of-pocket costs. One of the most serious problems with the health system in our country is very high out-of-pocket costs for the poor. And the evidence is that RSBY has not. So the reforms that are happening are necessary. There needs to be a universalization of social insurance for unorganized sector workers, and RSBY revamp was absolutely necessary. Very important that it is actually moved from the Ministry of Labour to the Ministry of Health. That's one reform that was necessary.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Maybe we can have you over for another day, for another chat. But thanks very much for putting those issues very succinctly for our viewers. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra from the Institute of Applied Manpower Research. Moving on to other news now. Nobody should threaten or warn India. That's a response from the Home Minister Rajnath Singh that he gave to China on Thursday, coming a day after China objected to India's plans to build a road along the border in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, Indian officials say that China has already spread its road and rail network, very much so, very close to the border, which is why China shouldn't be dictating to India what it can and cannot make on its territory.
India is flexing its regional muscle. It's telling China not to threaten a sovereign country and instead use dialogue to resolve its border problems.
भारत दुनिया का कोई भी देश वार्निंग इस समय नहीं दे सकता। भारत दुनिया का एक ताकतवर देश बन चुका है और जहां तक इंडो चाइना बॉर्डर डिस्प्यूट का सवाल है, मैं समझता हूं कि चाइना को भारत के साथ बैठना चाहिए और इस डिस्प्यूट को रिजॉल्व करना चाहिए।
India wants to build a 3,400-kilometer long road network along the Arunachal Pradesh border. Also planned are a few army outposts. To facilitate the entire program, it even relaxed some environmental rules last month. On Wednesday, China made a provocative statement telling India that its plan could complicate the border dispute. Security experts feel China is overreacting to the situation.
Very, very unfortunate that China has objected to this sort of a thing. I think construction of roads in the border area is a legitimate requirement. It has got no defense connotation. It is probably meant for the betterment of the people living in the border areas.
Political parties have also reacted to China's remarks. The BJP says China cannot dictate what India should do in Arunachal Pradesh.
As far as India's security and infrastructure concerns are concerned, we take no dictations. No external force has any right to dictate as to in which way India should move ahead with its security and in which way India should build its infrastructure.
कोई हक नहीं है कि इस मामले पर किसी तरीके का सवाल या निशान लगाए। अरुणाचल प्रदेश हिंदुस्तान का हिस्सा है और वहाँ पे जो भी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, सड़कें हैं, वो सरकार का हक है कि वहाँ बनाए।
The lack of a clearly demarcated border has been a trigger for recurring tensions for both countries. In the latest incident in September, Chinese troops crossed over into Ladakh. In a tense standoff, about 1,000 troops from both sides confronted each other. The matter was resolved only after a meeting of the leadership of the two countries. Shamsundar's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Meanwhile, India is one step closer to having its own satellite navigation system, much like America's GPS. The Indian Space Research Organisation successfully launched the third Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System, or the IRNSS-1C, today.
Exactly at 1:32 a.m. on Thursday, the ISRO rocket PSLV C-26 blasted off into space. Aboard the rocket was the IRNSS-1C, the third navigation satellite in a planned series of 7. The rocket's ascent was greeted with cheers from the ISRO scientists.
Mission director just announcing the successful completion of the mission.
20 minutes into the flight, the PSLV spat out the satellite at an altitude of around 500 kilometers above Earth.
India's third navigation satellite is up in the orbit. Our PSLV has done it again. This is the 28th flight of our PSLV.
The navigational system is designed to provide accurate position information within the country and up to 1,500 kilometers from the nation's boundary line. The system is similar to the global positioning system of the US, GLONASS of Russia, Galileo of Europe, China's Beidou, and the Japanese Kasi Zenith satellite system. The Prime Minister congratulated ISRO for the launch, saying it was a matter of immense pride and joy for the country.
I'm sure all the countrymen would be proud to realize, and I'll be proud to report back to the Prime Minister, that we have actually, through the medium of space technology, entered into a phase of Make in India.
The system will be used for terrestrial, aerial and marine navigation, disaster management, vehicle tracking and fleet management, integration with mobile phones, mapping and geodetic data capture, and visual and voice navigation for drivers. Thursday's launch marked the first time that India has conducted 4 orbital launches in a year. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The BJP-led NDA government today did the first major reshuffle of top bureaucrats since coming to power back in May of this year. Finance Secretary Arvind Mayaram, the top civil servant to the Finance Ministry, was replaced by Rajiv Maharishi. He's the Chief Secretary of Rajasthan. Mayaram has been shifted to the Tourism Ministry. He was the senior most among the 4 secretaries in the ministry, with twin roles, both as Finance Secretary as well as Economic Affairs Secretary. Mairam was appointed by the previous government. He has a little over a year left before he retires on the 31st of October 2015. Anil Swaroop, a 1981 batch IS officer of the Uttar Pradesh cadre, has been appointed as the new coal secretary. In all, 20 bureaucrats were removed, many of them at the secretary level. 2 days after the Nobel Prize Committee focused the attention of the world on child rights, the Supreme Court today had some very stern words for state governments for their casual attitude on tracing missing children. The court was hearing a petition filed by Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi's NGO, Bachpan Bachao Andolan. Reacting to the incomplete status report on such cases, the top court called the chief secretaries and the DGPs of Bihar, Karnataka, Tripura and Chhattisgarh to be present before it by the 30th of October. The court also made it clear that if adequate efforts were not made to trace back these children, their officers could be punished for contempt of court. According to the Home Ministry, 3.25 lakh children have been missing since 2011. That's an average of nearly 1 lakh children every single year. 45% of these children are untraced.
The Supreme Court has made it clear that every week they will take up 2 states and will ask the details of those states and what effort they are making.
Meanwhile, here's all the other news and updates from across the country in our special segment, Nationwide. The Gurgaon police have filed a case against 8 people who allegedly beat up 2 young men from Nagaland. The assailants are reported to be local residents. They allegedly told the victims, who were staying as tenants in the area, to go back to their home states. Both were hospitalized with severe injuries. In Phugana village in Uttar Pradesh, villagers clashed with a police team who were trying to arrest 20 people accused of rape during the Muzaffarnagar riots. 2 policemen were injured. Villagers pelted stones and even opened fire on the police. The police have filed a case against 100 people. Suspected militants triggered an IED blast in Baramulla in North Kashmir at about 10 o'clock this morning. The blast injured 2 soldiers. It took place when an army convoy was passing through the area. No militant group has claimed responsibility for the attack. We're going to take a break here on the program. When we return, President Obama says Ebola is no reason to panic, even as across the Atlantic, the European Union holds an emergency meeting. All the international stories coming up when the News Tonight returns. Welcome back. You're watching News Tonight. Time now to focus on all the international stories. President Pranab Mukherjee met his Finnish counterpart Sauli Niinisto at the presidential palace in Helsinki amid a grand ceremonial reception. President Pranab Mukherjee is on a 2-day visit to the Scandinavian country. India and Finland have signed 19 agreements to step up cooperation in energy, fishing and education. President Mukherjee has invited Finland to take advantage of the Make in India campaign, which aims to project India as a global manufacturer. The president also pitched India as a profitable destination for foreign direct investment, owing to easing of restrictions, growth, as well as an investor-friendly atmosphere.
Aware of policy Make it in India, Make in India, and I think it is very much possible that Finnish industries and business life also takes part to this by investing in India and producing goods in India.
Indian economy is moving ahead. In the last 10 years, before immediate preceding 2 years, it grew at a rate of 7.6%.
Now, after overnight clashes between the police and protesters, a semblance of calm returned to Hong Kong today. The protesters are still camped out and the government once again offered talks. But having been duped once, the activists are a little more wary now. The Chinese government, meanwhile, has banned the website of BBC News on the mainland. A semblance of calm returns to Hong Kong. This is the morning after another night of violence. The protesters are still camped out, hoping to break the will of the government. One signboard even warning the police. The students are very clear. They are staying put.
住呢個咁差嘅制度，竟然一個咁惡嘅政府可以擺到明唔聽你講嘢，但係都唔可以唔落台，仲要中共嗰啲仲要非常繼續強烈支持梁振英，咁我哋真係唔知可以做啲咩，除咗繼續留喺度。
It's not just the students. A cross-section of Hong Kong society is now joining in, moved by the momentous events of the last few weeks.
本身支持呢個運動係因為都認同呢個爭取民主嘅理念，咁二來亦都係覺得啲學生都為呢件事作出付出嘅時候，咁我哋一啲返到工嘅朋友咧，其實都應該要喺其他嘅情況都要出嚟 support 佢哋咯。咁同埋始終呢樣嘢都係爭取係 for 成個香港。
The Hong Kong government once again reiterated its willingness to talk, but after a false start last week, the protesters are skeptical.
The most constructive thing that the Hong Kong government can offer the students is to sit down and listen to the students what we can do together within the framework decision of the National People's Congress Standing Committee.
Thousands of miles away, the repercussions are being felt in Beijing. The Chinese government banned the website of BBC News, and the Foreign Ministry had this rather thin defense.
中国公众在互联网上享有充分的自由，同时，中国政府依法对互联网进行管理。
Early next week, the Chinese Communist Party starts a very important meeting, but the events in Hong Kong will clearly be in the foreground. Bureau Report, Rajya TV. Also in the foreground, European Union health ministers have gathered for an extraordinary meeting in Brussels to discuss the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. The bloc has faced criticism in recent days for its failure to coordinate an integrated response to this virus.
In the face of increasing alarm over the rising case of Ebola virus, health ministers of the European Union met in Brussels on Thursday to discuss a more aggressive approach to check the spread of the virus.
I want to propose a system to check the passenger for the first airport, the airport to exit, to the second or third airport.
We most definitely need to allocate more resources and more people going to work and help with the situation there, which is a very, very difficult situation.
Britain, Canada and the United States have increased screenings of passengers arriving from West Africa at their airports. France is establishing new treatment centers in Guinea.
Nous avons un double dispositif, j'insiste là-dessus, prise de température à la passerelle, donc avant l'entrée dans l'aéroport, et puis distribution dans l'avion de questionnaires qu'on appelle de traçabilité, c'est-à-dire pour parler comme tout le monde, qui vont nous permettre de retrouver les gens si on a besoin de les contacter après.
US federal health officials will appear before a congressional committee to answer their handling of the crisis. The second nurse detected with Ebola in Dallas was shifted to the Emory University Hospital in Atlanta that treated 2 patients successfully.
If we do these protocols properly, if we follow the steps, if we get the information out, then the likelihood of widespread Ebola outbreaks in this country are very, very low.
US President Barack Obama feels the country's public healthcare infrastructure was strong enough to preempt the spread of the epidemic. The Frontier Airlines even grounded the plane that carried an infected Ebola patient for additional cleaning. Bureau Report, Rajya TV.
At least 3 Indians were killed in one of the worst snowstorms in Nepal's Himalayan range. 2 more bodies have been recovered from Narku village in Manang district. The unseasonal blizzards and avalanches are being attributed to cyclone Hudhud, which has so far killed 30 people. Rescuers in Nepal are trying to reach more than 20 trekkers who have been trapped below a high Himalayan range. 130 trekkers who were stranded for the last couple of days have been rescued. Leaders from 20 Asian countries and 30 European Union countries arrived in Milan today for the 2-day ASEM summit. The standoff between Russia and the European Union over Ukraine is expected to take center stage. Bilateral talks are expected between Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko on the sidelines of the summit. Also, 4-way talks along with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande could also happen. This as part of a special 4-way contact group to try and reduce tensions over Ukraine.
Enhanced cooperation between Europe and Asia is a prerequisite for reviving economic growth and create jobs, and not least important in this country and in Europe.
There are many points from the 12-point plan that have not been implemented. The borders are not in Ukrainian hands, the troops have not withdrawn, and during the ceasefire we've witnessed more than 300 deaths. So the situation is not good, but it's important that Putin and Poroshenko continue the dialogue.
And more international news and updates in our special segment, Global Buzz. At least 21 militants were killed Thursday when Pakistani military choppers pounded their hideouts in Khyber, very close to the Afghan border. The attacks took place early Thursday morning in the remote Tira village, where the Taliban and another militant group that's banned, Lashkar-e-Islam, have taken refuge. The airstrikes by security forces come a day after a suicide bomber targeted members of a peace committee in the same area, killing 5 people. Indian-American Vanita Gupta, a top lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union, has been appointed to head the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Justice Department. Vanita becomes the first South Asian to be appointed to this post. President Barack Obama is expected to nominate her to serve as the permanent Assistant Attorney General of Civil Rights in the coming few months. She's an expert on federal and state policing issues, immigration and criminal justice reform. Vanita has been active in supporting South Asian communities. The European Court of Justice on Thursday struck down anti-terrorism sanctions imposed on the Tamil Tigers by the European Union, citing a technicality. It, however, ruled that the assets of the Sri Lankan group should remain frozen. The court said a decision by the European Union back in 2006 to place the LTTE on a list of militant organizations had been based on imputations derived from the press and the internet rather than on direct investigation. And all the sports news and updates coming up in Sports Beat. The Lalit Modi faction of the Rajasthan Cricket Association has moved the High Court against the BJP minority cell leader Amin Pathan and some others who allegedly removed the former IPL commissioner in a coup following a no-confidence motion. RCA Deputy President Mahmood Abdi and 11 others filed a writ petition, and they claimed that a mob of around 100 persons, led by the respondents, had forcibly entered the RCA office, but no action was taken. Top Indian shuttlers Saina Nehwal and PV Sindhu reached the second round of the women's singles event in the Denmark Open Superior Series. London Olympic bronze medalist Saina knocked out her German opponent Karin Schnaze 12-21, 21-10, 21-12, while two-time World Championship bronze medalist Sindhu registered a 21-12, 22-10 victory over Hong Kong's Hui Yin Ip. Striker Luis Suarez has received the Golden Shoe after his 31 goals for Liverpool last season. Suarez received the award from Liverpool's legend Kenny Dalglish after being the top scorer last season. Suarez was sidelined by FIFA for 4 months, which banned him for 9 competitive internationals after he bit Italian defender Giorgio Chiellini at the World Cup finals in Brazil earlier this year. And that's a wrap of the news tonight for tonight. Thanks very much for your time, folks. We'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Bye-bye.